There are moments in life that split your world in two, the before and the after. For me, that moment came in the most ordinary of places, my daughter's kitchen. Prize on a Thursday afternoon that smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon dish soap. I had just let myself in. She'd given me a spare key years ago, back when she first moved in. Prize. When the idea of me dropping by was a comfort rather than an intrusion. I still remembered that day, her beaming with pride as she showed me the little apartment she'd found. Prize, the worn hardwood floors, she said, gave it character, and the mismatched plates she picked up at a thrift store because she wanted it to feel lived in. Back then, Prize, she called me Dad, with a softness that felt like sunlight through a window. Back then, I could fix anything from a broken shelf to a broken heart. At least that's what I believed. That Thursday, Prize, I had come over with a box of homemade lasagna. Not just any lasagna. Her lasagna, the one I used to make on the nights before her high school exams. Prize, layering the pasta sheets and sauce while she sat at the counter, textbooks open, hair falling in her face. She would take a bite and say, Prize, this is love in food form. I suppose I thought maybe she could still taste that love. The box was warm in my hands as I stepped inside. I called her name once, twice, but she didn't answer. Prize, I found her in the kitchen, standing by the counter, her arms crossed over her chest. The look on her face was unfamiliar, guarded, like I was a stranger. Hey, sweetheart, I said. Prize, holding up the box like a peace offering. Brought you something special. She didn't smile, didn't even look at the box. She just said it. Dad, you ruined my life. For a second, surprise. I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she'd said, you run my life, which wouldn't have been flattering, but at least it wouldn't have landed like a blade between my ribs. Prize. But then she repeated it slower this time, each word deliberate, like she wanted it to sink in deep. I must have looked ridiculous, standing there with a pan of lasagna in my hands. Prize. My mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. In my mind, I could still see the little girl with scraped knees running into my arms. Prize, but in front of me stood a grown woman who clearly didn't see me as a hero anymore. Her words didn't just land in my ears. They settled somewhere deep in my chest, heavy and cold. Prize. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the air between us was suddenly thick, the kind of silence that doesn't invite questions. I set the lasagna down on the counter, careful not to slam it. Prize. My hands felt clumsy, like I was afraid I might drop something far more fragile than a glass dish. You ruined my life. The words looped in my head over and over. Ruined. Pride. Not changed. Not even complicated. Ruined. I had spent my entire adulthood trying to give her a life that was the opposite of ruined. When she was 6 and begged for a pink bicycle. Prize. I worked a weekend shift at the hardware store to make it happen. When she was 15 and cried over her first heartbreak, I drove across town in the pouring rain just to sit with her. Prize. Listening to music in silence until she stopped shaking. When she got into her dream college, but didn't know how she'd afford the dorm fees, I sold the fishing boat I'd been saving for retirement trips. Prize. I thought all of that was love. But standing there, seeing the way her eyes had hardened, I began to wonder if maybe all she'd ever seen was control. Behind her, the kettle on the stove began to hiss. Prize, steam curling toward the ceiling. She didn't move to turn it off. She just kept her arms folded, like she was holding herself together in a way that didn't include me. Finally, I found my voice. Prize. How? I asked. It came out quieter than I intended, almost a whisper. She didn't look away. Because you never let me figure things out on my own. Every time something went wrong, you stepped in. Prize, you fixed it. You didn't even give me a chance to fail. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it stung so much. All those years, Prize, I thought I was protecting her from pain. Now she was telling me the very thing I thought was love had stolen her independence. The kettle screamed louder. Still, neither of us moved. In that moment, Prize, I realized we were standing on opposite sides of a canyon that had been forming for years, maybe decades, and neither of us had noticed until now. The distance wasn't measured in miles, but in unsaid words. Prize. In moments when we'd both assumed the other understood, I looked at her and thought about the little girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat of my old truck, the smell of campfire still in her hair. Prize. The one who once told me, when I grow up, I'm going to marry someone just like you. And here she was, telling me I'd ruined her life. The whistle of the kettle finally broke through the tension. Prize. She turned her back to me almost in relief, as if the sound gave her permission to escape my gaze. She switched off the stove, poured the boiling water into a mug with a tea bag already waiting. Prize. Chamomile. The same tea I used to make her when she was too anxious to sleep. I thought about saying something light, something to break the ice, but the weight in my chest wouldn't let me. Prize. I had too many questions, and they were clawing to get out. So I said, all those times I showed up, all those times I helped, you didn't want that. She stirred her tea slowly. Prize, the spoon clinking against the mug like a metronome. I wanted to try, she said. I wanted to learn how to fix things on my own. But you were always there before I could even start. Surprise, you made decisions for me. Paid bills before I could figure out a plan. You took away my chance to grow. I felt a flash of heat rise up my neck. You think I did all that to control you? Prize, I was trying to keep you safe. To make sure you didn't have to struggle the way I did. She turned then, leaning against the counter, eyes locked on mine. Maybe that's the problem. Prize, you think struggle is something to avoid. But it's how people grow. I didn't get to find out who I am without you stepping in. And now I don't even know if the life I have is mine, Prize, or just yours by proxy. The words landed harder than I expected. I could feel my pulse in my ears. I wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't understand how much I'd sacrificed. But underneath the anger, Prize, there was something else. Fear. Fear that maybe she was right. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the air heavy with steam and the scent of chamois. I glanced at the lasagna on the counter. Prize, its foil lid still shining under the light. It looked absurd now, like a relic from a time when my gestures of love were simple and welcome. You know, I said slowly, Prize, I thought being a good father meant removing every obstacle in your path. I thought that was what love was. Her expression softened for just a moment, but then she shook her head. Prize, love isn't just removing obstacles. Sometimes it's letting someone trip and fall, and trusting they'll get back up. Her voice didn't waver, but I could see her hands tighten around the mug. Surprise. This wasn't easy for her to say, and yet she was saying it. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not literally, Prize, but in the way you realize the foundation you've been standing on for decades might have cracks you never saw. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just a fight. This was a reckoning. I could have argued, Prize. I could have listed every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dollar I gave up so she could have a life without fear. I could have told her she was ungrateful, that she didn't understand the world. Prize, that one day she'd thank me. But I didn't. Instead, I took a slow breath, the kind you take before stepping into cold water, and said, Prize, if that's how you feel, then maybe the best thing I can do now is to stop helping you. Completely. The words surprised even me. They came out calm, almost gentle. Prize, but I could see the shock ripple across her face. She straightened as if I'd just spoken in a language she didn't expect me to know. You mean? She started, but didn't finish. Prize, I said, no more fixing things. No more bailing you out. No more advice unless you ask for it. I'll give you exactly what you've been asking for all along. Your life, Prize, fully in your own hands. Her mouth opened then closed again. She took a sip of tea, but I could see her fingers tremble slightly against the mug. You're serious, she said finally. Surprise, yes, I replied. I'm serious. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't punishment. It was release. For both of us, I turned toward the counter, picked up the lasagna, and held it for a second. Prize. I thought about leaving it there, but something in me decided against it. Instead, I tucked it under my arm like it was just another thing I'd be taking back with me. Surprise. I'll let you get back to your day, I said, my voice steady. She didn't stop me as I walked to the door. I didn't look back. The late afternoon air was cool when I stepped outside. Prize. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of all my years as a father shift, as if I'd been carrying a load that I didn't realize could be set down. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen. Prize, the lasagna still warm on the table. I didn't eat it. I just sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Surprise, thinking about how love changes, and how sometimes the only way to love someone is to step out of their way entirely. Sometimes love is loud. It shouts across a crowded room. Prize, it fixes what's broken before you even know it's broken. And sometimes love is silent. It steps back, it leaves space, it lets go. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, Prize, I realized I'd been loving my daughter in only one way. My way. I'd never stopped to ask if it was the way she needed. Maybe she was right. Maybe in protecting her from pain. Prize, I'd also protected her from growth. Maybe in trying to keep her safe, I'd kept her small. The lasagna sat untouched, a quiet reminder that the things we make with love don't always end up where we hope. Prize. And yet, part of me wondered if this space I'd just given her might be the most loving thing I'd ever done. I didn't know if she'd call. I didn't know if weeks or months, Prize, or years would pass before we spoke again. But I did know this: I wouldn't run to fix things anymore. If she wanted me in her life, she would have to open the door herself. Prize. And maybe that door would mean more to her if she had to turn the handle on her own. The first morning after my decision felt wrong. Not because anything was out of place, but because nothing was. Surprise. For years, my mornings had a rhythm: wake up before the sun, brew a pot of black coffee, check the news, then think of some small excuse to swing by her place. Bring her fresh bread from the bakery. Prize. Drop off her mail if something came to my address, fix a leaky faucet she hadn't even mentioned yet. Now I just sat at the kitchen table, the steam from my mug curling into the cold air. Prize. With nowhere to go and no one expecting me. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was hollow. The radio played a soft country song in the background. Prize. The kind I used to hum along to while driving to her apartment. I reached for my keys out of habit, then stopped mid-motion, my hand hanging over the table like it had forgotten what to do. Prize. I had told her I would step back, and I meant it. But no one tells you that letting go isn't just about them. It's about you learning to live without the role that's defined you for decades. Prize. The day stretched ahead, empty and unfamiliar. I tried filling it, cleaned the garage, sorted through old fishing gear, even polished the banister by the front door. Prize. But every little task seemed to whisper her name. I found myself in the attic around noon, sifting through boxes. That's when I saw it, her kindergarten artwork. Prize. The one with crooked houses and stick figure people holding hands under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in messy crayon letters, she had written me and Daddy forever. I sat on the floor, Prize, holding that paper, and realized I had no idea when forever had started to feel so short. It was close to 3 in the afternoon when the phone rang. For a moment my heart jumped, a foolish reflex. Surprise, really, thinking it might be her. Maybe she'd call to say she'd been too harsh, or at least to ask about the lasagna. But when I picked up, it was Margaret from the church. Prize. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they're trying to keep something from sounding like gossip. John, dear, I saw Emily this morning. She came to the food drive with a friend. Prize. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right between you two. She seemed different. Different. A word that could mean anything. I wanted to ask what she meant. Surprise, but I knew Margaret well enough. If she was calling, she already suspected something. And in a small town, suspicion travels faster than truth. I gave the safest answer I could. We're fine. Surprise, just giving each other some space. There was a pause on the other end. Then, in a voice that was almost a whisper, she said, "Space can be good, John. But too much space, well, surprise, sometimes it grows into a wall." After we hung up, I sat there staring at the phone, the dial tone still buzzing faintly in my ear. Emily hadn't called me, not even to check in. If she'd needed help, surprise, she would have figured it out without me. And wasn't that exactly what she'd said she wanted? But there was something about hearing she'd been different. That gnawed at me. Prize. Not because I wanted to run to her and fix it. I'd promised I wouldn't, but because I suddenly realized I no longer knew what was happening in her life. For years, surprise, I'd been the first to know when she was sick, when she got a raise, when she broke a plate or locked herself out of the apartment. And I was just another person on the outside looking in. Prize. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, cutting the room into strips of golden shadow. I could feel the edges of my old life receding. Prize, replaced by something I didn't yet recognize. A quiet that was beginning to feel less like peace and more like absence. That evening, as the sky turned the color of old copper, Prize, I put on my coat and went for a walk. Not toward the park, not toward the diner. My feet carried me in a direction I didn't consciously choose. Prize. It was only when I turned the corner onto Maple Street that I realized where I was heading. Emily's apartment building stood there like it always had. A brick facade with ivy creeping up one side. Prize, the front steps slightly uneven from years of settling. A single warm light glowed from her second-floor window. I stopped across the street, keeping myself in the shadows between 2 lampposts. Prize. I wasn't here to knock. I wasn't here to fix anything. I told myself I just wanted to see for myself that she was okay. From where I stood, I could make out her silhouette moving around the kitchen. Prize, she was laughing, not with me, but with someone else. A tall figure stepped into view, setting down a bag of groceries on her counter. I stayed only a moment longer before turning away. It wasn't jealousy. Prize. It wasn't even hurt. It was the sudden, sharp realization that she was already building a life without me in it, and that she might not need me at all. On the walk home, Prize, I thought about how many years I'd spent being the first person she called. How strange it was to see her sharing that easy ladder with someone else. But I had promised her space, and space, I was learning, Prize, isn't just a gift you give someone. It's a test of your own restraint. So I kept walking, my hands buried in my pockets, the cold air biting at my face. I didn't look back. There's a kind of pain that doesn't shout. It doesn't come with slammed doors or angry words. It just settles in quietly, like dust on a shelf you forgot to clean. Until one day you run your hand across it and realize how much is gathered there. Watching Emily from across the street, seeing her laugh with someone else, I felt that quiet kind of pain. Not because she was happy. I want her to be happy, but because her happiness no longer had anything to do with me. It's strange, the things we tell ourselves about love. That it's measured by how much we do for someone. That it's proven by how quickly we show up when they call. But maybe real love is measured by something harder. How willing we are to step back when they don't call at all. That night I didn't write her a message. I didn't call to just check in. Instead, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the wind move through the trees. The house felt bigger without her in it, though she hadn't lived here in years. I realized it wasn't the walls that felt empty. It was the space in my life where she used to fit so naturally. And as the cold night settled in, I knew this was only the beginning. The quiet was here to stay, at least for now. It happened at the grocery store. Of all places, it had to be there, between the canned soup aisle and the display of day-old bread. I was reaching for a jar of marinara sauce when I heard her laugh. Not the polite kind she used for strangers, but the real one, the laugh that starts low in her chest and spills out like it can't help itself. I would have known that sound anywhere. I turned my head, and there she was. Emily. She hadn't seen me yet. She was pushing a cart alongside the same tall man I'd glimpsed through her kitchen window the other night. His hand rested casually on the handle next to hers. Their movements unconsciously in sync, like they'd been shopping together for years. I froze. Part of me wanted to walk over to say hello, to ask how she'd been. But there was something in the way she was leaning toward him, showing him a box of cereal. That stopped me. It wasn't that I didn't belong in that moment. It was that the moment already belonged to someone else. I stayed where I was, my fingers still resting on the marinara jar. She turned slightly, her eyes sweeping over the aisle. For a brief second I thought our eyes might meet. But they didn't. She didn't see me at all. I don't know what hurt more, being invisible to her in that instant. Surprise, or realizing I had made myself this way. I don't know what made me do it. Pride, instinct, or maybe just the achy of missing her. But I stepped forward, my cart wheels rattling softly on the linoleum. Emily, I called, my voice low but steady. She turned. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, eyes lighting up when she spotted me in a crowd. But it flickered out so quickly I almost wondered if I imagined it. Dad, she said. No smile, not cold exactly, but guarded. The man beside her glanced at me, then at her. As if waiting for a cue on how to react. I didn't mean to interrupt, I said. My hands were wrapped so tightly around the handle of my cart that my knuckles ached. Just thought I'd say hello? She nodded once. Hi.
That was it.
No, how are you? No, what brings you here? Just hi. The word hung there, thin as a thread. The man extended a hand politely. I'm Chris. I shook it. His grip was firm, his expression kind enough. But I could tell from the way he stayed slightly turned toward her that his place in her life was already defined, and mine was no longer what it used to be. We stood there in the middle of the aisle, surprised, the hum of the freezer units filling the silence. I searched her face for something, anything that said she still needed me. But her eyes slid back to the box of cereal in her cart, and she said, Well, we should get going. It was the way you speak to an acquaintance you don't plan on seeing again for a while. I could have asked her to stay. I could have told her I missed her, surprised that the house felt too quiet, that I didn't know how to be her father from a distance. But instead, I forced a small smile and said, Of course. Don't let me keep you. She gave a quick nod, almost like a business transaction being concluded, then turned her cart down the next aisle with Chris beside her. I stayed where I was until the sound of their wheels faded. Then, instead of heading toward the checkout like I'd planned, I turned around and walked to the far end of the store. For the first time in years, I skipped buying the things I knew she liked. The peanut butter she swore tasted better than any other brand, the herbal tea I used to bring over when she had a cold. If she was building a life without me, then I had to stop leaving little fingerprints on it. Back at home, I unpacked my groceries in silence. The absence of those Emily items in my bags felt heavier than I expected. It wasn't about the food. It was about the invisible thread I'd just cut, one of the last small ways I'd been holding on. Letting go, I was learning, wasn't a single act. Prize, it was a series of tiny decisions, each one a quiet surrender. Some goodbyes are loud. They happen in doorways with raised voices and final words you can't take back. Others are quiet. So quiet, prize. You don't even realize you've said them until long after you've walked away. That moment in the grocery store wasn't dramatic. There were no accusations, no tears. Prize. Just a short exchange and the unspoken knowledge that our lives now moved on parallel tracks. Close enough to see each other from time to time, but no longer touching. Prize. I used to think love was measured in presence, in showing up and being there no matter what. But maybe love is also knowing when to step aside. Surprise, even if it means standing in the shadows while someone else walks beside them. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sun slip behind the trees, I realized I couldn't just wait for Emily to come back into my life. If I was truly letting her live her own, then I had to start living mine too. Not as Emily's father, but as John Price, a man who still had days to fill and a story to write that didn't revolve around her every chapter. And maybe, just maybe, if she ever did come back, she'd find me not as the man she pushed away, Prize, but as someone she could meet again on equal ground. The morning sun spilled through the blinds, cutting the kitchen into stripes of golden shadow. I'd been up since 6, surprise, not because I had somewhere to be, but because sleep had become a shallow thing these days, breaking easily, like thin ice underfoot. For the first time in a long time, I made breakfast for one. 2 eggs, Prize, fried until the edges crisped, a slice of toast with just enough butter to glisten. No extra plate. Prize. No setting aside a portion for when Emily drops by. It felt strange, like erasing someone from a photograph but leaving the outline where they used to be. Prize. I decided the night before that I wouldn't spend the day in the house. The walls were starting to feel too familiar with my silence, and I needed to hear voices that didn't echo in my own head. Prize? So I grabbed my coat, stepped out into the cool morning air, and headed for Miller's Diner. A place where the coffee was weak but bottomless. Surprise. And the waitresses called you Han, whether they'd known you for years or had just met you. Inside, the smell of bacon and maple syrup wrapped around me like an old sweater. Prize, I slid into a booth by the window, the red vinyl seat sticking slightly to my coat. A waitress named Clara poured me coffee before I even asked. Haven't seen you in here for a while, she said. Prize, her pen already poised over her notepad. I shrugged. Prize. Wes, I've been keeping busy. She smiled. The kind that says she knows you're lying but isn't going to call you on it, and took my order for pancakes and sausage. As I sat there, Prize, I found myself watching the other customers. An older couple sharing a crossword puzzle, a young man in work boots wolfing down eggs before a shift, 2 women laughing over something on a phone screen. Prize. It struck me then. This was what people did with their mornings when they weren't orbiting someone else's life. They filled their own. Prize. They made routines that didn't depend on someone else's needs or moods. I realized I'd been living like a satellite for years, all my movement and light tied to the gravity of my daughter's world. Surprised now, drifting alone, I didn't know where to go. After breakfast, I lingered over my coffee longer than I needed to. The diner's door chimed every few minutes as people came and went. Surprise, each one with somewhere to be, someone to meet, something to do. I stayed in my booth, watching the world move without me, and felt both invisible and oddly safe in that invisibility. Surprised, Clara came by to refill my cup. You waiting on someone? She asked. I shook my head, no. Just thinking. Dangerous habit, she teased and walked away with a wink. Surprise. When I finally stepped outside, the air had warmed slightly, though the wind still carried a bite. I had no destination in mind, so I just let my feet choose. They carried me down Main Street, Prize. Past the hardware store where I used to buy Emily's school supplies. Past the park where she'd learned to ride her bike. I slowed when I reached the park's edge. The swings squeaked in the wind, empty. Prize. But I could still see her there at age 8, pumping her legs furiously, calling out, Dad! Higher! Back then, I believed the higher I pushed, the happier she'd be. Prize. I never imagined there would come a day when she wouldn't want me to push at all. I kept walking, my hands deep in my coat pockets. The sidewalk was cracked in places, tufts of grass pushing through, stubborn against the concrete. I thought about how nature always found a way to reclaim space, how maybe people did too. I passed a storefront I hadn't noticed in years. Prize, a second-hand bookshop with a bell over the door. On impulse, I went inside. The air smelled faintly of paper and cedar, and the shelves leaned under the weight of stories. The owner, a man in his 70s with a beard the color of snow, greeted me warmly. Looking for anything in particular? Not really, I said. Just seeing what's here? He nodded. Prize. That's the best way to find what you didn't know you needed. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers over the spines of books. My eyes landed on a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Prize, I hadn't read it in decades, but I remembered the way it made me feel. The quiet dignity of struggle, the acceptance of loss, the understanding that some battles are fought not to win, surprise, but to prove you were willing to fight. I bought the book for $3 and slipped it into my coat pocket. By the time I got home, the sky had turned the dull color of wet cement. Prize, I hung my coat by the door, set the book on the table, and put the kettle on for tea. It was shaping up to be a quiet evening, the kind I was slowly learning to accept. Prize, the phone rang just as the kettle began to hum. Not the landline, the cell phone, the one I kept mostly for Emily. Prize, because she'd once complained that calling the house phone felt too old-fashioned. I picked it up, my thumb hesitating over the green button. The screen didn't say her name. Prize. It was an unfamiliar number. Hello, I answered. A woman's voice, brisk and professional. Is this John Miller? Yes. This is Dr. Hanley's office. Prize. We have you listed as the emergency contact for Emily Miller. She had a minor accident this afternoon. She's stable. But we thought you should know. The words landed with a dull thud in my chest. Surprise. Stable. Should know. What happened? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. She slipped on the steps outside her building. Likely just a sprain, but we'll need to run a few tests to be sure. Prize. She's here at the clinic now. I stood there in the kitchen, the steam from the kettle fogging up the window, my mind racing. I'd promised her space. I'd promised not to rush in and fix things. Surprise. But this wasn't a broken appliance or a late bill. This was her. Hurt, and I was still her father. I told the nurse I'd be there within 15 minutes. Prize. The drive to the clinic felt longer than it should have. Every red light was an insult, every slow driver a test of my patience. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Prize. When I finally pulled into the parking lot, I sat for a moment in the car, the engine idling, my breath fogging the windshield. Part of me wanted to run inside to see her. Prize, to hold her hand like I used to when she was small. Prize. Another part of me, the part that remembered her kitchen and the words "you ruined my life," wondered if showing up would undo whatever progress I thought I'd made in letting her go. Prize. I killed the engine and just sat there, watching the glass doors of the clinic slide open and shut as patients came and went. Each one walked out into the gray afternoon, some limping, some clutching paperwork. Prize. Some with a friend or family member at their side. Emily was somewhere in there, and she didn't know I was outside. I thought about walking in, about the way her eyes might widen when she saw me. Prize. Would it be relief? Annoyance? Something in between. I thought about the nurse telling her, "Your father is here," and how she might tense up the way she had in her kitchen weeks ago. Surprise. And then I thought about my promise. Not to her, to myself. I had told her I would stop stepping in unless she asked. Not because I didn't care, Prize, but because I finally understood that love isn't always about being first through the door. Sometimes it's about waiting in the parking lot until you're called. So I stayed. Surprise. I sat there in the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel, watching the doors. After 20 minutes, she emerged. She had a soft brace wrapped around her ankle and a bag of paperwork in her hand. Prize. Chris, the tall man, was beside her, holding the door open, steadying her. She laughed at something he said. Not the full-bodied laugh I'd heard in the grocery store. Prize. But enough to tell me she was okay. I didn't start the car until they were gone. That night I heated up a bowl of soup and ate it in silence. I didn't call her. I didn't ask how she was feeling. Surprise. And though every instinct in me screamed to reach out, I reminded myself she has someone else who can catch her now. And maybe that's what she needs. Surprise. There's a kind of love that thrives in action, in fixing, in rushing, in showing up uninvited because you can't imagine doing anything else. It's the love I'd lived by for most of my life. Prize. And then there's the other kind, the kind that holds itself back, that chooses silence over interruption, patience over intrusion. That second kind, it's harder. Not because it feels less prize, but because it feels more restraint, more discipline, more faith that the person you love will stand without your hands holding them up. Sitting in that clinic parking lot, Prize. Watching her walk out with someone else by her side, I realized something I should have learned a long time ago. A parent's job isn't to be the hero in every chapter. Prize. Sometimes it's to step out of the story for a while so the child can write their own. It hurt. God, it hurt to watch from a distance. But in that ache, there was also something else strange. Prize. Quiet pride. She didn't need me to carry her. She was moving forward on her own, even if her steps were careful, even if they leaned on someone else. That night, Prize, as I closed the old man and the sea and set it on the table, I thought about how the fisherman in the story fought his battle not for the reward, but for the dignity of the fight itself. Prize. Letting go is its own kind of fight, and I was learning slowly, painfully, that it's one worth having. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang. Prize. I was halfway through folding the week's laundry. A slow, deliberate task that filled the quiet without really touching it. The sun had dipped low, painting the walls in a warm, fading gold. Prize. When I saw her name flash across the screen, I almost didn't believe it. Weeks had passed since our last real conversation, and the calls that had come before this one had been, well, non-existent. Prize. I let it ring once, twice. By the third ring, I answered. Dad. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Not the clipped, guarded tone from our last encounters. Prize. But something closer to the voice I used to hear when she was younger. I'm here, I said, sitting down on the edge of the couch. What's going on? There was a pause, and in that silence, Prize, my chest tightened. I need a favor, she said finally. It was such a simple sentence, but it felt like a crack in the wall we'd been building between us. A part of me wanted to jump in, Prize, to say yes before she even explained. Another part, the part that had been practicing restraint, told me to wait, to listen. I know I said I wanted to handle things myself, she continued. Surprise, but this is different. It's not something I can do alone. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Different. Not something she could do alone. Prize. The words felt like an old key turning in a long locked door. What is it? I asked. It's about Chris, she said, her voice wavering just slightly. I stayed silent, letting her continue. Prize. He's supposed to fly out tomorrow for a work trip, but his mom had an accident this morning, and he needs to drive out of state tonight. Prize. I promised I'd take care of something for him while he's gone, but... She stopped, exhaled sharply. It's complicated, Dad. My instinct was to tell her I'd be there in 10 minutes. Prize, no questions asked. That was the old reflex, the one that had driven me for years. But I bit it back, waiting. I need you to help me move some boxes from his apartment to storage. They're heavy. Surprise, and my ankle isn't 100% yet. I could ask a friend, but... Her voice trailed off, and I could almost hear the unspoken words, you're the only one I trust with this. For a moment, Prize, I didn't know whether to feel relieved or suspicious. This wasn't an emergency, not in the way a hospital call was. It was personal, something she could have solved in a dozen other ways. And yet, Prize, she'd called me.
All right, I said finally.
Tell me when and where. There was a pause, and in that pause I swear I could hear her shoulders drop in relief. Thank you, she said quietly. Prize. I'll text you the address. When the call ended, I just sat there for a moment, phone still in my hand. I could feel that old current running through me, the one that came alive when she needed me. Prize. But mixed with it was something new, the knowledge that this wasn't just about moving boxes. No, this was something else entirely, and I had a feeling I was about to find out what. The next evening, Prize, just before 6, I pulled up in front of Chris's apartment building. It was a squat brick complex with narrow windows and an old metal fire escape running down the side. Prize. The kind of place where the hallway lights flicker and the elevator makes you nervous. Emily was waiting out front, her hands buried in the pockets of a thick sweater. When she saw my truck, Prize, she gave a small wave. Not the enthusiastic kind, but more than the polite nod I'd gotten at the grocery store weeks ago. You made it, she said as I got out. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, surprise. Keeping my tone light, we headed inside, the smell of dust and faint cooking oil clinging to the stairwell. Chris's apartment was on the 2nd floor. When she unlocked the door, Prize, I expected to see stacks of cardboard boxes lined neatly along the wall. Instead, the place was almost bare. Only 3 boxes sat near the door, sealed with tape. But on the kitchen counter, Prize, I noticed something else. A small stack of unopened mail, all addressed to Chris with return labels from various hospitals and clinics. I didn't say anything, Prize, but I caught the way Emily's eyes flicked toward the pile and then away like she'd forgotten it was there. We carried the boxes down to my truck in 2 quick trips. When we were done, Prize, I wiped my hands on my jeans and said, "That's lighter work than you made it sound." She hesitated, then sat down on the curb looking out at the street. Prize, I didn't just call you for the boxes, she admitted. I stayed quiet, waiting. I called you because I didn't want to be alone here. Chris's mom is in bad shape, Prize, and he's been running himself ragged between work and taking care of her. I guess I just needed someone I could sit with for a bit. And you're still that person, Prize, even if I don't say it much. Her words settled in my chest like warm coals, small, steady, enough to take the edge off the evening chill. On the drive to the storage unit, Prize, she talked more than she had in months. Nothing dramatic, just small things about her week, the new recipes she'd tried, how the neighbor's cat kept finding its way into her apartment. Surprise. And I realized then maybe she didn't need me to fix her life anymore. But she still needed me in it, just differently. On the way back from the storage unit, we drove in comfortable silence. Surprise, the kind I hadn't felt with her in years. No tension, no unspoken accusations, just the hum of the tires on the road and the occasional click of her turning the heat up a notch. Surprise. When I pulled up in front of her building, she didn't reach for the door handle right away. Instead, she looked at me and said, almost shyly, "Thanks for coming tonight." Surprise, not just for the boxes, for being here. I nodded. Anytime. And for once, I meant it in a way that didn't mean every time. After she went inside, I sat in the truck a moment longer. Surprise. I thought about how many years I'd equated love with constant presence. How I believed that if I wasn't always there, I was failing as a father. But tonight had shown me something different. Prize. She didn't need me to orchestrate her life. She didn't need me to shield her from every bump in the road. What she needed was simpler, quieter. Prize. To know I'd still show up when she asked. Not to take over, but to stand beside her. Parenthood doesn't have to end when your children grow up. But it does have to change. Prize. You go from being the architect of their world to being a steady landmark they can find on their own map. You stop steering the ship, and you just keep the lighthouse lit. And maybe that's enough. Prize. It was just past midnight when the knocking started. Not loud, not frantic, just steady, deliberate, as if the person on the other side knew I'd hear it even if I was half asleep. Prize. I'd been in bed for hours, but hadn't managed to drift off. The book I'd been reading lay open on the nightstand, its pages fanned out like a bird's wing. Prize. The sound pulled me up right before I even realized I was moving. At my age, midnight visitors were rare and rarely good news. I grabbed my robe, cinched it around my waist, and shuffled toward the front door. Surprise. The porch light cast a weak yellow glow over the steps, and when I peered through the glass, my breath caught Emily. She was standing there in the chill night air, arms wrapped around herself. Prize. Hair pulled into a messy bun like she hadn't planned to leave the house. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from the cold. I opened the door. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, Prize, but it carried a weight I hadn't heard in years. She stepped inside, and I caught the faint scent of her shampoo, mingled with something sharper. Stress, maybe. She didn't take off her coat. Surprise just stood in the entryway like she wasn't sure whether to sit or pace. "What's going on?" I asked gently. She swallowed, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "It's Chris. We had a fight." Prize. A bad one. I motioned toward the couch, and she sat perching on the edge like she might spring back up at any moment. Her hands twisted in her lap. "I don't even know why I came here," she admitted. Surprise. I just didn't want to be alone. In that moment, a dozen responses rose in my throat, advice, comfort, questions. But I bit them all back. This wasn't the time to be the problem solver. Prize. She didn't need the old version of me right now. She just needed a place to sit where the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. So I sat beside her close enough that she knew I was there. Prize, but far enough that she didn't feel crowded. "Tell me what happened," I said finally. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor as she spoke, her words coming in fits and starts. Prize, like she wasn't sure which parts she was ready to say out loud. "It started small," she began. "We were talking about his mom's recovery, about how much time he's been spending with her." Prize. I told him I understood, but I also said I felt like we weren't spending any time together anymore. She shifted in her seat, the fabric of her coat whispering against the couch. "Prize, he said I was being selfish, that I didn't get how hard it was for him. And I said something I shouldn't have." I waited. Silence hung between us, heavy and fragile. Surprise. I told him maybe I did understand because I grew up with a dad who never let anyone handle things themselves, who always had to be the one fixing everything. The words stung. Prize. Even though I knew she hadn't meant them for me tonight. Or maybe she had. Either way, they landed in my chest like a dull ache. "I didn't mean to drag you into it," she added quickly. Surprise, glancing at me for the first time since she'd sat down. It just came out, and then he got quiet, really quiet, and he grabbed his keys and left. Prize. I don't even know where he went. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together, willing herself not to cry. I could feel my instincts waking up. The urge to tell her what to do. Prize, how to fix it, maybe even to call Chris myself. That was the part of me I'd been wrestling with for months, the fixer, the rescuer. Prize. The man who couldn't stand to see his child in pain without throwing himself in the way. But I'd promised myself something. I'd promised her something. So I reached for the mug on the coffee table, prize still warm from earlier in the evening, and handed it to her. Here, I said. Tea helps. She took it, wrapping her hands around the ceramic like it was an anchor. And for the first time all night, prize, she exhaled. In the past, I would have started talking before she'd even finished her tea, laying out a plan, offering to drive her to Chris's place, rehearsing what she should say when she saw him. Prize. But tonight I just stayed quiet. I let the clock tick softly in the background, the only sound in the room besides the faint clink of her spoon against the mug. After a few minutes, she looked at me, puzzled. Prize. You're not going to tell me what to do? I shook my head. Not unless you want me to. She blinked as if trying to figure out whether I was serious. You always have an opinion. Prize. Always. I still do, I said with a small smile. But I think you can figure this one out without me stepping in. Prize, and I trust you to do that. Her gaze softened in a way I hadn't seen for a long time. She leaned back against the couch, her shoulders losing some of their tension. Prize. We sat like that for a while, not solving anything, not trying to, just sharing the quiet. It struck me that maybe this was what she'd been asking for all along, not my absence, surprise, but my presence without my control. When she finally stood to leave, she paused by the door. I don't know how this thing with Chris will go, she said. Prize. But thanks for not making me feel like I'm failing. And in that moment, I knew I'd done the right thing. Not by fixing her problem, but by giving her the space to stand in it on her own. Prize. After she left, the house felt different. Not emptier. Just quieter in a way that didn't press on my chest. I sat back down on the couch, the cushion still warm from where she'd been sitting. For years, prize, I thought my worth as a father was tied to how quickly I could step in, how decisively I could take charge. But tonight had been different. Tonight my worth was in how still I could sit, prize. Love isn't always about mending what's broken. Sometimes it's about holding the space until the other person is ready to mend it themselves. And maybe that's the harder kind of love, prize, because it demands patience, restraint, and trust, not in the other person's perfection, but in their ability to stumble, get back up, and keep walking. I glanced at the clock, prize. It was nearly 1 a.m. Somewhere out there, Emily was still sorting through her feelings, maybe replaying our conversation, maybe not. But I knew one thing for certain: when she needed me next, prize, she wouldn't be afraid to knock. And when that knock came, I'd be here. Not with all the answers, but with the door open. Prize. It was a Saturday morning when the phone rang, the kind of crisp autumn morning where the air smells faintly of wood smoke and the world feels unhurried. I had just poured my first cup of coffee. Prize. The steam curling into the pale light streaming through the kitchen window. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Prize. But something, a low hum of instinct, made me pick it up. Mr. Miller. The voice on the other end was male, low and measured. Yes, this is Officer Ramirez with the city police. Prize. Your daughter, Emily Miller. We have her here at the station. She's not under arrest, but... He hesitated, like he was choosing his words carefully. She's been involved in an incident. Surprised, she asked us to call you. My grip on the mug tightened as she hurt. No, sir. Physically, she's fine. But she's shaken up. Prize, she can explain when you get here. I set the coffee down, hard enough that a few drops sloshed over the rim, and grabbed my keys. Every step from the kitchen to the truck felt heavier than it should. Prize, as though the air itself was trying to slow me down. The drive to the station was a blur. The early morning streets were quiet. Prize, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of every sound your tires make on the asphalt. My thoughts chased themselves in circles in incident, not under arrest, shaken up. When I pulled into the lot, prize, I spotted her immediately through the station's front windows. She was sitting on a bench in the lobby, arms folded tightly, her gaze fixed on the floor. She looked smaller somehow, prize, like she'd folded into herself to take up less space. And for the first time in months, I didn't care about promises or boundaries. I just wanted to get to her, prize. The glass door slid open with a muted hiss as I stepped inside. Emily looked up at the sound, and for a split second her face softened, a flicker of relief breaking through the tight mask she wore. Prize. Then she stood, her arms still wrapped protectively across her chest. I crossed the lobby in a few strides. You okay? My voice was low, steady, but I could feel the undercurrent of urgency beneath it. Prize, she nodded, though her eyes said otherwise. I'm fine. I needed you here. Before I could ask more, a tall man in uniform approached. Officer Ramirez, I guessed. He gave me a polite nod and matured. Prize, Miller, thanks for coming. Emily's free to go, but we thought it best for you to hear what happened directly. We stepped into a small side room, windowless, prize with a humming fluorescent light and the faint scent of coffee gone stale. Emily sat across from me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She started slowly. Prize. I was driving back from the market, and I guess I didn't see the stop sign. There was a cyclist. I didn't hit him, thank God. But I swerved, and the car behind me swerved too. Surprise, we both pulled over. Hey, he was furious. Started yelling, saying I shouldn't be on the road. Her voice wavered. I told him I was sorry, but he kept going. Prize. Then Chris's name came up somehow. I think he recognized me from the building, and he said some things about him. Ugly things. I lost it. I yelled back, Prize. And that's when someone called the police. I felt my jaw tighten. The details barely mattered. All I could see in my mind was my daughter standing on the side of the road, shaken and alone, Prize, with a stranger towering over her. You didn't do anything wrong, I said more sharply than I intended. I shouldn't have yelled, she murmured, but I was scared, Prize, and angry. Officer Ramirez stepped in gently. We're not pressing charges. Just maybe take it slow for the rest of the day. He handed her back her license, then looked at me. Prize. She's okay to leave. As we walked toward the door, Emily's arm brushed mine. It wasn't a clutch for support, just a quiet acknowledgement that I was there. Prize. But it was enough to reignite something in me I'd been trying to keep dormant for months, the instinct to protect, to shield, to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Outside, surprised, the morning sun had burned off the last of the haze, but I barely noticed. Emily walked beside me, silent, her eyes fixed on the asphalt of the parking lot. Prize, I unlocked the truck and opened the passenger door for her. An old habit I hadn't shaken even when I'd been keeping my distance. As she climbed in, I said, Prize, we're not going straight home. She looked at me, startled. Why? Where are we going? To the market, then to that intersection. Her brow furrowed. Prize, Dad? I want to see it, I said firmly. I want to know exactly where this happened, what the sightlines are, how easy it is to miss that stop sign. Prize. I'm not letting some loudmouth make you feel like you're reckless without knowing the truth myself. She sighed, leaning back in the seat. You're doing it again. Surprise. Stepping in. Yeah, I admitted, starting the engine. Maybe I am. But there's a difference between controlling and standing up for you. Prize. And I'm not about to let someone turn a near miss into a story that sticks to your name. Her expression softened, though she shook her head like she was trying not to smile. Prize, you're impossible. Runs in the family, I said, pulling out of the lot. At the intersection, I parked on the shoulder and got out. The stop sign was half hidden by an overgrown branch. Prize, the red metal dulled by years of sun and weather. From where she would have approached, it was easy to see how it could blend into the background. I took a few photos on my phone. Surprised, not because I planned to send them anywhere, at least not yet, because it felt like reclaiming a piece of the story. When I got back in the truck, Emily was watching me. Surprise, a faint crease between her brows. You didn't have to do that, I know, I said. But I wanted to. On the drive back, neither of us said much. Surprise, the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of the tires filled the silence, but it wasn't the brittle, uneasy quiet we'd known before. This was softer. A quiet with room in it. I kept my eyes on the road. Surprised, but my thoughts were tangled. I told myself I wouldn't step in unless she asked. But the truth was she had asked. Not in words, maybe not even consciously, but in the way she called me that morning. Prize, in the way she sat in the station lobby with her arms folded tight. Some rules are worth keeping. Others, well, sometimes they have to bend to fit the shape of the moment. I glanced over at her. Prize. She was leaning against the window, the sunlight catching in her hair. Her shoulders no longer hunched. For months I'd been trying to figure out how to love her from a distance. Prize. But maybe love isn't about distance or closeness. Maybe it's about knowing which one the moment calls for. Sometimes you step back so they can stand. Prize. And sometimes you step forward so they know they're not standing alone. That afternoon, after I dropped her off, I sat in my truck for a while, watching her disappear into the building. Prize. The rule I'd made for myself was cracked now, maybe even broken. But as I started the engine, I knew one thing: if breaking it meant she walked a little taller, I'd do it again. It started with a draft. Prize, a thin, cold whisper of air that curled down the hallway every time the wind picked up. I'd been meaning to check the attic for weeks, telling myself it was just a loose vent or a cracked window frame. That Saturday, I finally pulled down the creaky ladder and climbed up, flashlight in hand. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, the scent of things forgotten. Boxes lined the walls in uneven stacks. Surprise. Some labeled in my handwriting, others in a script I hadn't seen in years. Her handwriting. I knelt to move a box of old holiday decorations when I saw it, a thin envelope wedged between two larger cartons. Prize, the paper was yellowed, the flap sealed but brittle with age. Across the front, in looping blue ink, it read, "For Emily when she's ready." My chest tightened. I knew that handwriting. Prize, it was her mother's. I sat back on my heels, the dust motes swirling in the beam of my flashlight. She'd been gone for over a decade, taken by an illness that moved faster than we could prepare for. Prize, in all those years, I'd never seen this letter. I should have put it back. I should have waited. But the words "when she's ready" gnawed at me. Was she ready now? Would she ever be? And who was I to decide? Surprised, that evening, when Emily came by to drop off a sweater I'd left in her car, I handed her the envelope without explanation. Her fingers hovered over it like it might burn. "Price, where did you find this?" she asked.
"In the attic," I said quietly.
"Your mom left it for you." Emily didn't open it right away. She sat at the kitchen table, Prize, the envelope resting between her hands, her eyes fixed on her mother's handwriting like she was trying to memorize every curve of every letter. "I don't even remember her writing me anything," she said, Prize, almost to herself. I stayed standing, leaning against the counter. "Maybe she didn't want you to, not until now." Her thumb slid under the brittle flap, careful not to tear more than necessary. Prize, the paper inside was folded neatly in thirds, the creases softened by time. She unfolded it slowly, her breath catching as she began to read. I watched her eyes move across the page, surprised, the way her lips trembled just slightly, and then softly she began to read aloud. "My sweet Emily, if you are reading this, Surprise, it means time has passed. Enough for you to carry memories without letting them crush you. I want you to know that everything I ever did, every choice I made, Prize, was because I loved you and your father more than anything in this world." Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard and kept going. "I know you and your dad will have your differences. Surprise, he will try to protect you more than you want. It's who he is. But don't mistake his protection for control. It is love, flawed, human, but fierce. One day you will understand that, Prize. And I hope you forgive him sooner than I forgave my own parents." By the time she reached the last lines, her cheeks were wet. "And Emily, take care of him when I no longer can. He will need you, Prize. Even if he never says it." She lowered the letter to the table, staring at it through the blur of her tears. The silence between us was thick, Prize, but not the kind we'd had in recent months. This one was full, heavy with meaning neither of us could put into words. Just finally she looked at me. "I think she knew this would happen." "Us, Prize. The way we've been?" I nodded, my throat tight. Maybe she knew better than we did how this would go. Emily kept tracing the edge of the paper with her fingertip, Prize, like she wasn't ready to fold it back up just yet. Her voice was quieter now, almost fragile. "You know, when I told you that you ruined my life, I thought I was just telling the truth, Prize. But maybe I was only telling part of it." I didn't move. Didn't even breathe too loudly, afraid she'd stop. She looked down at the letter again. "Mom's right. I didn't see it then, Prize, but you were there because you wanted me safe. And yeah, sometimes it felt like too much, like I couldn't breathe, Surprise. But when things got bad, really bad, you were the only one who showed up. I felt something shift in my chest, an achy loosening just enough to let in a little air. Prize." She set the letter down and met my eyes. "I'm not saying we go back to how it was. I still need to figure out my own life. But I don't want to keep you so far away anymore, Prize. Maybe we can find something in between." Her words landed heavier than I expected, not because they were dramatic, but because they were honest. It wasn't an apology, Prize. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a neat bow. It was an opening. I gave a small nod. Something in between sounds about right. For the first time in months, Prize, the corner of her mouth lifted in something that almost looked like the smile I remembered. That night after she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me. Prize. I'd read my name in my wife's handwriting countless times before she passed, but seeing it now, seeing her words to our daughter, was like hearing her voice in the next room. Surprise. It struck me how this letter had been written for Emily, yet it carried something for me too. A reminder, a warning, and maybe a blessing. Prize. I thought about the way she'd predicted our patterns before they even happened. My need to protect, Emily's need to push back, the friction that would follow. Prize. She'd known both of us well enough to see the storm years before it rolled in, and in her own quiet way she'd left us a map out of it. Love isn't a straight line between two people. Prize. Sometimes it's a triangle, a shape held together by the memory of someone who isn't there anymore, but whose presence still binds the other two. That letter was proof she was still here with us. Surprise, not to fix the cracks, but to remind us that the bridge between us was worth walking, even if it had to be rebuilt plank by plank. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Prize. When I see Emily again, I'll give it back to her. It belongs in her hands, not mine. But tonight, just for a little while, I'll keep it here on the table, letting its weight remind me. Prize. Some promises aren't about keeping your distance. They're about finding your way back. It was early evening when I heard it. Not from Emily, not from a friend, but from the television. Prize. I'd left the news running in the background while fixing dinner, half listening as a local anchor read off the day's headlines. Then I heard her name. Emily Miller, Prize, a marketing coordinator at Weston & Co., is facing allegations of mishandling client funds. I froze, the knife still in my hand, halfway through slicing a tomato. Prize. The segment cut to a shaky cell phone video. Emily leaving her office building, a microphone thrust toward her by someone just off camera. She kept her head down, saying nothing, the same tight, Prize, guarded expression I'd seen in our worst moments. The anchor's voice returned. No charges have been filed at this time. Sources say the company is conducting an internal review. Surprise, Miller has declined to comment. I turned off the stove without thinking, the sizzle of the pan dying into silence. My mind was already racing. Where was she now? Was she alone? Prize. Did she know this was on the news? Part of me wanted to call her immediately. Another part knew the first thing out of her mouth might be, don't get involved. Prize. But it's one thing to give your child space when they're learning to live without you. It's another to watch their name get dragged through the evening news. I didn't call her, I drove. Prize. The streets blurred under the dim streetlights, every turn fueled by the same thought, she shouldn't be alone tonight. When I reached her building, I half expected she wouldn't answer. Prize. But after the second knock, the door opened just far enough for me to see her face. Her eyes were rimmed red, not from tears alone, but from exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones. Pride, she asked, voice low. I did, I said. And I'm here to listen, not to fix. Just to hear you out. Something in her posture shifted. Prize, a fraction of the weight lifting off her shoulders. She stepped aside, letting me in. The apartment was dim, lit only by the glow of a lamp in the corner. Prize. Papers were spread across the coffee table. Financial reports, email printouts, and a yellow legal pad scrawled with notes in her handwriting. It's not true, she began, sitting heavily on the couch. Prize. The money wasn't missing. It was moved into a temporary holding account because the client asked for it. They didn't put it in writing. Prize. And now they're acting like it never happened. I took a seat opposite her. Do you have proof? She gestured to the pile of papers. Some. Enough to clear me if they look closely. Prize. But the company, they're more worried about their image than the truth. It's easier to let me take the fall quietly. Her hands clenched into fists. Prize. Can't even defend myself publicly. The contract says no statements without company approval. So I just have to sit here while people think I'm a thief. Listening to her. Prize. I felt that old surge in my chest. The part of me that wanted to march into her office, slam the evidence on someone's desk, and dare them to smear her name again. Prize. But I also remembered every conversation we'd had about space, about letting her stand on her own. This was different. This wasn't a missed stop sign or a fight with Chris. This was her name, her career, Prize, her future. And if I stepped in, I might make things worse or I might save her. The line between the two had never felt so thin. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Prize. Emily, what if you didn't have to speak for yourself? What if someone else did it for you? Her brow furrowed. What are you talking about? I'm not bound by your company's contract. Prize. I could go to the media or straight to that client if you want. I could tell them what really happened. I could show them you're not who they're painting you to be. Her eyes widened. Dad, no. Prize. That would make everything worse. If you go public, the company will say I leaked it through you. They'll bury me faster. I'm not afraid of them, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Prize. I'm afraid of you losing everything because you're stuck playing by rules they're already breaking. She pushed the papers toward me. You think I haven't wanted to. Surprise. Every day since this started, but if I go down swinging, I still go down. I have to be smart, not loud. I looked at the stack of evidence, then back at her. Prize. So you're telling me to just watch. I'm telling you to trust me, she said quietly. Even if it means letting my name get dragged through the mud for a while. Prize, I need to handle this my way. Her voice didn't shake, but I could see the fear beneath it. And in that moment I realized my fight wasn't with her company, or even the client. Prize. It was with myself, with the part of me that couldn't stand to see her under fire without throwing myself into the line of it. That night, long after I'd driven home, Prize, I sat in the dark with her words echoing in my head. I need to handle this my way. I'd heard variations of that before, but this time was different. This time it wasn't defiance, it was resolve. Prize. She wasn't asking me to disappear, she was asking me to believe she could fight her own battle. Believing in someone doesn't mean you stop caring if they fall. Prize. It means you stand far enough back to let them throw their own punches, even if every instinct in you is screaming to step in. I wanted to be her shield. Prize, but shields take hits meant for someone else. And maybe in the long run, that only leaves them weaker when they have to stand without one. Prize. I left the lamp off and sat there until the first light crept in through the blinds. The urge to act hadn't gone away. I doubted it ever would. But for now my role was to watch, surprised, to wait, and to be the one she could come to when the fight was over, no matter how it ended. If love had taught me anything by now, it was this. Prize. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do for someone is nothing at all. It had been 3 weeks since the news first broke. 3 weeks of whispered phone calls I wasn't part of. Prize. Of headlines that had already moved on to the next scandal but still left a trace in Google searches and office gossip. Prize. I saw her for the first time since that night at her apartment when I dropped by the farmer's market on Saturday morning. I hadn't planned it. I was just there for apples and fresh bread. Prize. But she was standing by the flower stall, her back to me, wearing a coat that looked too big for her. When she turned, my heart sank. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed by the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. She'd always been good at holding herself tall. Prize. Even when she was angry with me. But now her shoulders slumped like the weight she carried had finally settled on her bones. She smiled when she saw me, but it was small, almost apologetic. Hi. Prize. Dad.
Hi, Em.
I tried to keep my voice steady, light, like nothing was wrong. We walked together through the stalls, talking about the weather. Prize. About the bread vendor raising his prices. Small talk that danced carefully around the real thing we both knew was there. But as she bent to pick up a bunch of tulips, I noticed her hands tremble. Prize. She steadied herself quickly, tucking the flowers into her basket, but it was enough. Enough to tell me the pressure was eating away at her from the inside out. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Prize. But every step beside her felt like walking on a tightrope over a drop I couldn't measure. Because I knew, if she slipped much further, I wasn't sure I could just watch anymore. 2 days later, Prize, she called. Not to talk, but to ask if I could water her plants while she worked late. Her voice sounded thinner than usual, like she'd been talking through clenched teeth all day. A Prize. When I let myself into her apartment that evening, the first thing I noticed was the mess. Emily had never been a neat freak, but she liked things in order. Shoes lined by the door. Prize. Dishes rinsed in the sink. Now the coffee table was buried under unopened mail, and the kitchen counter was crowded with takeout containers. Prize. I watered the plants and was about to leave when I spotted her work bag on the floor, half unzipped. A folder had slid halfway out, spilling papers across the rug. I bent down to gather them and saw the notes. Prize. Deadlines circled in red, client names scrawled in the margins, and one page with a list that made my stomach tighten. Things I must fix before Friday. And below it, bullet points not just for work. Prize. But for herself, sleep more than 4 hours, eat one real meal. Don't cry at the office. I was still holding the page when the door opened. She froze when she saw me. Prize, her eyes darting from the list in my hand to my face. Dada. Her voice was flat, warning, and wary all at once. I wasn't snooping, I said quietly. It just fell out. But, Prize. Em, this isn't just work stress. You're wearing yourself down. She set her bag on the counter and rubbed her temples. I know. But I can't stop. If I slow down, Prize, they'll have another excuse to push me out. I wanted to tell her that no job was worth this. That her health mattered more than proving herself to people who'd already made up their minds. Surprise. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't ready to hear that. Not yet. And that was the knife's edge I was standing on. Say nothing and watch her sink. Prize. Or step in and risk breaking the fragile trust we'd been rebuilding. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that list in her handwriting. Eat one real meal. Surprise. Don't cry at the office. Those aren't goals a person writes unless they're standing at the edge of something. By morning, I knew I couldn't just sit on my hands. But I also knew if I pushed too hard. Surprise, she'd shut the door on me again, so I went about it sideways. I started with small things. A bag of groceries left outside her door. Fresh vegetables, bread from the bakery she liked. Surprise, her favorite lemon yogurt. No note, no love, Dad scribbled on a card. just there. Then I called an old friend, Carla, who happened to be a counselor at the community center. Prize, I didn't tell her Emily's whole story. Just that I knew someone running on fumes who might need a safe place to talk. Carla promised she'd happen to bump into Emily at the market sometime soon. Surprise. The last piece was trickier. I reached out to a contact I still had at the local paper, someone I trusted, and asked them an innocent question. Do you know if Weston & Co. Surprise is still under review for that client account mess? I didn't mention Emily's name, but I made sure they knew there was more to the story than the headline said. It wasn't a rescue. Not exactly. Prize. It was more like setting a few lanterns along a dark path in case she decided to look for them. 3 days later, she called. Not to accuse me. Prize, not to thank me. Just to tell me she'd had a decent meal for lunch, and that she'd run into a nice woman named Carla, who made her laugh in the middle of a stressful day. Her voice was lighter. Prize. Still tired, but lighter. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself believe she might be finding her way back without me dragging her there. Prize. I used to think love was measured in the size of the battles you fought for someone, how loud you could shout for them, how hard you could push back against the world on their behalf. Prize. But watching Emily these past weeks taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Sometimes love is measured in the weight you don't add to someone who's already carrying too much. Prize. I didn't storm her office. I didn't demand meetings or confrontations. Instead, I planted small markers she could find when she was ready. Reminders that she wasn't walking through this alone. Prize. Even if I wasn't walking right beside her, it's a different kind of presence. One without the noise, without the need to be seen as the savior. It's quieter. But in its own way, it's stronger. Prize. Maybe this is what my wife meant in her letter. The part about taking care of each other in ways the other might not notice right away. Emily didn't say she knew those groceries were from me. Prize. Or that Carla wasn't just a coincidence, and I didn't tell her. Because sometimes the best help is the kind that leaves no fingerprints. It was a gray Thursday morning when the email came. Prize. I wasn't supposed to know. Emily didn't tell me right away, but the change in her voice when she answered my casual, "How's your week?" over the phone told me something had shifted. Surprised, she hesitated, then said, "They've made a decision." The line went quiet after that, except for the faint sound of her breathing. I waited, but she didn't go on. "Do you want to tell me?" I asked. Prize, keeping my voice soft. "I am not ready," she replied. "But if you're free this evening, maybe I can stop by." The rest of the day dragged. I tried reading, fixing a squeaky door hinge. Prize. Even mowing the lawn. But everything felt like busy work, as if I was just marking time until the real moment arrived. By 6 o'clock, the sky had turned the same dull silver as my old wedding band. Surprise, I heard her car pull up in the driveway, the engine cutting off the slam of the door. When she walked in, I noticed she wasn't carrying her work bag. That more than anything made my stomach tighten. She sat at the kitchen table, fingers laced together. "They called me into a meeting this morning," she began. "The HR director, my manager, and someone from legal." She paused, staring at the wood grain in the table as if reading a message there. "They said the investigation was over." The words came out flat, almost anticlimactic. Prize. But I saw her shoulders tremble with the effort of holding them steady. "They said there wasn't enough evidence to support the complaints." Prize. "That it was mostly hearsay." She let out a laugh that had no joy in it. "Mostly." As if that mostly hasn't already burned through my reputation. Her eyes lifted to mine. Surprise, and for the first time in weeks, they weren't guarded, they were raw. "Dad, I should feel relieved, I should be happy. But all I feel is empty." Surprise, like I've been holding my breath for so long that I forgot how to breathe. I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. She didn't pull away, Prize, but she didn't grip back either. Just let my hand sit there warm against her cold skin. "I lost clients," she went on, her voice breaking. "Friends at work stopped talking to me." Prize. "Some of them still will. And even though they cleared me, I'm still the woman from that headline." Her words twisted something in my chest. Prize. Every instinct screamed to tell her I'd fix it, that I'd march into her office, drag her name through the mud in front of anyone who'd ever doubted her, force the world to apologize. Prize. But I stayed still, because this wasn't a problem that fists or fury could solve. Her breath shuddered. "I just keep thinking, what if they're right about me? Surprise, what if I did ruin my own life?" That was the moment I felt the old wound between us ache. The years she'd blamed me for decisions I thought were for her own good. And I realized in her mind, Prize, the shadow of that resentment had never fully left. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet stretch between us until it felt less like silence and more like space. "Emily," I said finally, surprise. "Do you remember when you were about 12 and I missed your school play?" Her brow furrowed. "Yeah. You said you had a meeting at church. You sent flowers after." I nodded, surprised. "That's what I told you. But the truth is I was sitting in the parking lot the whole time. I could hear the applause through the gym doors." Her eyes narrowed, confusion mixing with disbelief. "Why?" "Surprise, why would you do that?" "Because that morning someone in the congregation accused me of taking money from the offering plate. No proof. Just whispers. And I thought if I walked in there, if I sat among the other parents, I'd see it in their eyes."
The doubt.
"The suspicion. I didn't want you to feel that." I took a slow breath. They cleared me a week later. But by then, the story had already stuck to me in some people's minds. I learned something then, that being proven innocent isn't the same as being free. She didn't say anything, but her gaze softened. Surprised, the ice around it cracking. "I wish I'd told you sooner," I said. "Not to make you feel sorry for me, but so you'd know the story other people tell about you is never the whole truth." Surprise, and it's never the only one you get to live. For the first time that night, her lips curved. Not into a smile, but into something that looked a little like relief. That night, after she left, I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out the 2 mugs we'd used for tea. Through the window, the streetlights made pale circles on the wet pavement, like small islands of light in an ocean of dark. I thought about how easy it is to believe the stories people tell about you, especially the ugly ones. They stick like burrs, catching on every step you take, until you think they're part of your skin. But I also thought about how stories change, not quickly, not all at once, sometimes just a sentence at a time. And sometimes the change starts with a voice you trust, telling you, you're more than what they say. I couldn't erase what had been said about Emily, just as no one could have erased what had been said about me all those years ago. But I could stand close enough for her to hear me when the noise of the world got too loud. Because maybe that's what fathers are meant to be. Not shields that block every blow, but steady hands that help you stand again when the ground feels unsteady. When I turned off the kitchen light, the house went quiet. But in the stillness, I felt something I hadn't in months. The sense that we were no longer standing on opposite shores. We weren't on the same side yet, not entirely, but I could see the bridge starting to take shape. And for now, that was enough. It was just past 7 a.m. when the phone rang. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, the kitchen still wrapped in that quiet blue light before the sun fully rises. "Dad." Emily's voice came. Surprise, clear and steady this time. "I'm quitting my job." I set the mug down a little too hard. "You're what?" "I can't do it anymore," she said. "Even if they cleared me." I walk into that building and feel like I'm wearing a scarlet letter. Every hallway. Every elevator ride. It's like walking through a courtroom where I've already been judged. I opened my mouth to argue, but she kept going. I've been offered a position at a small nonprofit downtown. Lower pay, longer hours, no prestige. But it's work that matters. Community outreach, helping people get back on their feet. And Dad, I think it's the first thing I've felt excited about in months. Her words caught me off guard. This wasn't the voice of someone running away. It was the voice of someone stepping towards something. Still the father in me, the man who'd spent decades thinking about stability and security, felt the urge to pull her back. "Emily, are you sure? That's a big leap. And after everything." "I'm sure," she interrupted. "For once, I'm making a choice that isn't about proving anything to anyone. Not to them. Not to you, just to me." "Emily," I began slowly, choosing each word as if it might tip the balance. I've seen people take risks like this, thinking it would be a fresh start and end up with nothing but regret. You've worked so hard to get where you are. Are you really ready to walk away from all of it?" There was a pause on the line. Not hesitation, but the kind of pause where someone steels themselves before saying something they've carried too long. "I'm walking away," she said finally, because staying would be the real regret. Her voice was steady, but under it I could hear a tremor. Not fear, but the weight of clarity. I kept thinking if I fought hard enough, if I stayed long enough, I could win back the version of my life I had before the accusations. But Dad, that version doesn't exist anymore. I'm not her. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life chasing her. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I thought about all the times I'd tried to claw my way back to before after a loss, after a betrayal, the stubborn belief that if I could just rewind far enough, everything broken could be made whole again. It had never worked. Surprise. Do you remember what you told me the night Mom died? She asked suddenly. My breath caught. I told you a lot of things that night. You said, when the ground shifts, surprise, you don't waste your strength trying to push it back. You learn to plant your feet somewhere new. I closed my eyes. I'd forgotten saying that. But she hadn't. Surprise. I opened my eyes and let out a slow breath. For weeks, maybe months, I'd been clinging to the idea that my role was to keep her safe by holding her still. Surprised, but hearing my own words come back to me. Words I'd given her when she was 15 and grieving her mother. Something in me shifted. You're right, I said quietly. There was a beat of silence. Surprise. I'm sorry, what? You're right, I repeated, a faint smile tugging at my mouth. I don't want you chasing a ghost either. If this is where you need to plant your feet, Surprise, then I'll help you dig in. She didn't speak, but I heard the sound of her breath change, lighter, like a door cracking open. I have something for you, I went on. It's in the garage. Surprise. Your mother's old leather satchel. The one she carried when she was doing volunteer work. She said it reminded her that her hands were meant to carry more than just her own weight. Surprise. I think it should be yours now. The line went quiet again, but this time it was a quiet full of things unspoken. Gratitude, surprise, prize, maybe even a little love that neither of us had dared to name lately. Dad, she said finally, and I could hear the lump in her throat. Thank you. That evening, after we hung up Prize, I went into the garage. The satchel was exactly where I remembered, tucked high on the shelf, wrapped in an old pillowcase. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, Prize, and when I ran my fingers along the straps, I could almost see her mother's hands fastening the buckles, slipping in notebooks, pens, and envelopes. I brushed off the dust, Prize, thinking about how some things are meant to be passed down not because they're valuable in the world's eyes, but because they've carried the weight of someone's purpose. Surprise. When Emily came by 2 days later, I didn't wrap the satchel in fancy paper or make a speech. I simply held it out to her. She traced the edge of the flap. Prize, her eyes lingering on the faded initials pressed into the leather. Plant your feet. I reminded her, but don't be afraid to move when the ground grows richer somewhere else. As she left, Prize, the satchel slung over her shoulder, I realized something. This wasn't about me letting her go. It was about walking beside her, even if the road she chose looked nothing like the one I'd imagined. Surprise. And maybe that's what love is in the end. Not steering someone toward the life you'd planned for them, but giving them the tools to build the life they can truly live in. Prize. The rain had stopped by the time she reached her car, but the ground was still wet, soft, ready for something new to take root. Prize. It had been only 3 weeks since Emily started at the nonprofit when the first storm hit. Not a real storm, not yet, but the kind that begins with whispers. I was on my porch that Saturday morning, Prize, sipping coffee, when my phone buzzed with a text from an old friend at church. Your daughter's in the news. Not in a good way. My stomach clenched before I even opened the link. Prize, there she was, a photo of Emily, hair pulled back, standing outside a small community center. The headline beneath her face read, Local Nonprofit Under Investigation for Misuse of Funds. Prize, I read the article twice, my pulse pounding harder each time. The story wasn't detailed, Prize, but it mentioned questionable bookkeeping practices and named Emily as the program coordinator who approved certain expenses. It was happening again. Different stage, Prize. Same script, accusations without proof, the slow drip of doubt. And just like before, I knew how quickly the tide of public opinion could turn. I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over her contact. Prize. Part of me wanted to drive straight to her office, shield her from whatever was coming. The other part, the quieter, older part, knew that this time my role might be different. When Emily picked up, Surprise, her voice was calm. I saw it, she said before I could speak. Don't worry, Dad, I'm handling it. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Emily, Prize, this is exactly how it started last time. Accusations, headlines, people who don't even know you making up their minds in 30 seconds. You need to think about. I am thinking, she cut in. Surprise, and I'm not running this time. Her tone stopped me cold. This isn't about pride, I said. It's about protecting yourself. You know how quickly this can spiral. Exactly, she said, Prize, her voice rising. And I also know what happens when you give in to fear. You shrink. You disappear. And you spend years trying to convince yourself it was the right choice when deep down, Prize, you know you let them decide who you are. Her words were like a mirror. I could see my younger self reflected in them. The man who had once stepped back when standing firm would have cost too much. Prize. Dead. Last time I was accused, I stayed quiet because I thought silence meant dignity. All it did was let other people write my story for me. Prize, I'm not letting that happen again. Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, but she didn't back down. And in that moment, Prize, I realized this was the real test. Not whether she could survive another wave of public doubt, but whether she could stand in it without losing herself. I let out a long breath, leaning back in my chair. Prize. All right, I said quietly. If you're not running, then I'm not either. She didn't respond at first, as if unsure she'd heard me right. Prize. What do you mean? I mean, I'm showing up, I said. Every meeting, every press briefing, every public hearing they throw at you. I'll be there. Not as your pastor, not as your protector. Prize. Just as your father, sitting in the front row so no one forgets you're not alone. Her breath caught. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do, I interrupted. Prize. Because I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the loudest lie wins, unless someone is willing to stand beside the truth. Prize, even when it shakes. I could almost hear her blinking back tears through the phone. And one more thing, I added. We're not going to fight this with anger. Prize. We're going to fight it with transparency. We open the books ourselves, invite anyone who wants to see them. Prize. We don't wait for the storm to pass. We walk straight into it. It was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, okay, let's walk. And just like that, surprise, the battle lines were drawn, not in some courtroom or behind closed doors, but in the open where everyone could see which way we were facing. Surprise, the first public meeting was held in a cramped room at the back of the town library. Plastic chairs lined up in uneven rows, a long folding table at the front where the board sat. Surprise, and a dozen curious faces waiting for answers. Emily walked in first, shoulders straight, eyes steady. I followed a few steps behind. Prize. The way you might walk behind someone carrying a candle through the dark, close enough to shield it if the wind picked up. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't defend herself with excuses. Prize, she laid out receipts, invoices, emails, every scrap of evidence she had. She spoke clearly without bitterness, and when someone asked a question meant to trip her up. Prize. She answered with the kind of calm that comes from having nothing to hide. As I watched her, I realized something important. Courage isn't always the absence of fear. Sometimes, Prize, it's the decision to stand so firm that fear has to move around you, and loyalty. Prize. It's not just showing up when you're needed. It's showing up in a way that makes the other person stronger than they were before you arrived. When we left that room, the air outside smelled like rain. Prize. But the clouds were breaking. The storm wasn't over, but we were still walking. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the envelope arrived. Plain white, no return address, my name written in blocky. Prize. Uneven letters like someone trying to disguise their handwriting. At first, I thought it was another piece of hate mail, the kind that had started trickling in after Emily's name hit the headlines. Prize. I almost tossed it straight into the trash, but something, maybe the weight of the paper, heavier than usual, made me stop. I slid it open with my thumb and pulled out a single folded sheet. Prize. Inside was a photocopy of what looked like an internal memo from the nonprofit's accounting office. The subject line read, refund allocation, do not discuss publicly. And then, in the margin, in pen, Prize. Your daughter isn't the one they should be looking at? My pulse quickened. If this document was real. Prize. It didn't just cast doubt on the accusations against Emily. It pointed somewhere else entirely. But there was no signature, no way to trace who had sent it. And that made me wonder. Prize. Was this a lifeline or bait? I stood in the kitchen staring at the paper, knowing that whatever I did next could change everything. I drove straight to Emily's apartment. Prize. The letter in my jacket pocket feeling heavier than it should. She opened the door, barefoot, hair tied up, a mug of tea in her hand. One look at my face and her smile faded. What happened? She asked. Prize. I laid the photocopy on her kitchen table. She read it once, then again, her lips pressing into a thin line. Where did you get this? It showed up in my mailbox an hour ago. No return address. Surprise, nothing else. She sat down, setting the mug aside. If this is real, it could clear my name. Or, I said, it could drag us into a fight we're not ready for. Prize. Whoever sent this doesn't want to be known. That means they either can't be trusted, or they're in real danger. Emily tapped the page with her finger. Dad, we can't just sit on this. Prize. If there's someone else responsible, people need to know. I hesitated. What if it's a setup? What if they're hoping you'll run with this so they can discredit you? Her eyes met mine, steady, Prize, unflinching. Then we verify it, quietly. Before anyone else sees it, I leaned back in my chair, the old conflict rising in me again. Protect her at all costs, or let her take the risk she believed in. Surprise. This time I realized there was no middle ground. That night, long after Emily had gone to bed, I sat in my truck with the engine off, the letter resting on the passenger seat under the glow of the street lamp. Surprise. I thought about the years I'd spent in ministry, listening to people confess the parts of their lives they never wanted anyone else to know. Surprise, I'd learned that truth rarely travels in a straight line. It hides in the shadows, tangled in fear and pride. If I gave this letter to Emily and it turned out to be a trap, it would crush her. Surprise, but if I could trace it back to whoever sent it, I might be able to pull the truth into the open without her ever stepping into the crossfire. I started with the simplest clue, the postmark on the envelope. Surprise. It wasn't from our town. It had been stamped 2 cities over, the kind of place where no one would notice a stranger dropping something into a mailbox. I drove there the next morning before sunrise. Surprise, the roads still empty, the air sharp with early autumn chill. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. A name, a face, maybe just a feeling that told me I was in the right place. Surprise. But as I turned onto Main Street, I spotted something in the window of a closed coffee shop, a flyer for a charity fundraiser dated 3 months ago. Surprise, with the nonprofit's logo at the bottom and a list of committee members, one name jumped out at me. Someone I knew. Surprise. Someone who had every reason to protect themselves, even if it meant letting Emily take the fall. I sat there in my truck, staring at the name on that faded flyer. Surprise. Feeling the weight of an old truth pressing down on me, one I had preached for years, but somehow forgotten. In my own life, silence is not always neutral. Surprise. Sometimes it is the very thing that keeps the wrong people safe. This person, this familiar name, had been in our home, eaten at our table, smiled at my daughter. And now, surprise. If the letter was to be believed, they were letting her drown to keep their own hands dry. I thought about all the times I'd chosen to keep the peace rather than confront the storm. Surprise, how many of those moments had actually been mercy, and how many had been cowardice dressed up as wisdom? It was a sickening thought. But as I watched the first light of morning spill over the rooftops, surprise, I made myself a promise I would not stay silent this time. If confrontation was the only way to drag the truth into daylight, then so be it. When I turned the truck around to head home, surprise, the letter sat on the seat beside me, no longer just a piece of paper. It was a map, and I had just decided to follow it wherever it led. I didn't call ahead. Surprise, people prepare different faces when they know you're coming, and I wanted the truth, not the version rehearsed in a bathroom mirror. Surprise. The address I had for Daniel Reeves was only a 15-minute drive from my house. He'd been on the nonprofit's finance committee for years. Surprise, a man known for his charming smile at Sunday service and his knack for turning any conversation into a joke. I parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance. Surprise, his house was neat. Too neat. The kind of place where the lawn looked like it had been cut with scissors. When he opened the door, surprise flickered across his face before he covered it with that same practiced smile. Pastor, he said warmly, though I hadn't been his pastor in years. Surprise, what a surprise. Mind if I come in? I asked. There was a beat of hesitation, barely a second, but enough for me to catch it. He stepped aside. Surprise, of course. The moment I walked into his kitchen, I saw a stack of unopened mail on the counter, and right there on top, an envelope identical to the one that had landed in my mailbox. Surprise, I pulled out a chair at his kitchen table without waiting for an invitation. Daniel followed slowly, his smile thinning, like he could sense the reason I was there. Coffee, he offered. No, I said. Surprise. I didn't come here for small talk. His eyes flicked to the envelope on the counter. Quick, but not quick enough. That, I said, nodding toward it, looks familiar. Daniel didn't move. Just bills. Bills don't come without a return address, I replied. And they don't use the same paper, the same block handwriting. Is something that showed up in my mailbox 2 days ago. He sat down across from me, folding his hands like he was about to pray. What exactly are you accusing me of? Pastor, I'm not accusing, I said evenly. I'm asking, did you send me that memo? The one pointing away from my daughter? His jaw tightened. If I did, what then? Then we're going to have a very different conversation, I said. One about why you're whispering the truth in the dark instead of speaking it where it matters. For the first time, his eyes dropped to the table. He let out a long breath. It's not that simple, he murmured. You don't know what they can do to people who talk. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp. And you don't know what it's doing to the people who stay silent. Daniel's fingers drummed lightly on the table, a nervous rhythm that betrayed the calm expression he was trying to hold. Finally, Prize, he said, you think this is just about Emily? It's not. That memo you saw, it's the tip of something much bigger. I stayed silent, letting him fill the space. There's a fund, he continued, Prize. That's supposed to be for emergency relief projects. Only it's been bled dry for years. Redirected. Quietly. The board doesn't talk about it, but a few of us know, Prize. And the ones who do either look the other way or disappear. Disappear, I repeated. He nodded, eyes flicking toward the window, as though someone might be listening from the street. Surprise. One guy, Paul Mercer, questioned an allocation last year. Next thing we know, he's retiring early and moving to another state. No goodbyes, no forwarding address. Prize. Just gone. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the autumn air. And Emily. They needed someone they could burn without burning themselves. Prize, she was new enough that no one would doubt the story. A perfect scapegoat. I clenched my fists under the table. Then why not come forward now? Because, he said, lowering his voice, surprise. If I go public, they'll drag me down too, and I have a family to protect. I leaned back, studying him. This wasn't just fear. It was a man balancing on a razor's edge. Prize. Torn between survival and conscience. I looked at Daniel for a long moment, seeing not just a man, but a mirror. How many times in my life had I done the same? Prize stayed quiet because speaking up meant stepping into the fire. I used to think silence was a form of grace, that avoiding conflict was kindness. But here it was, in the flesh, silence is a slow. Prize, steady poison. Daniel, I said quietly, the men you're afraid of, they're counting on exactly this. On good people staying still. He didn't meet my eyes. I stood, Prize sliding the chair back against the tile. You can keep your head down if you want. I won't judge you for it, Prize. But I'm not going to watch my daughter's life be dismantled piece by piece so someone else can keep theirs tiddy. As I walked toward the door, he called after me, Prize. Pastor, if you're going to move on this, don't do it alone. I turned, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the envelope on the counter, like it was a live grenade. Prize. I can't stand with you in the open, he said, but maybe I can hand you the next breadcrumb. Out on the street, I tucked my hands in my pockets, feeling the wind cut through my coat. Justice, Prize, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just a man in a cold wind walking toward the next shadow with his head held high. And I was ready for the next shadow. The breadcrumb wasn't a note, Prize, or a whispered name or some coded message. It was a single brass key, old heavy with the teeth worn smooth from years of use. Daniel pressed it into my palm like he was passing contraband. Prize, his hand trembling just enough for me to notice. Opens a storage unit, he said quietly. Not in my name. Don't ask how I got it. Don't tell anyone you have it. That night, Prize, I sat at my kitchen table long after Emily had gone to bed, the key resting in the center like it was deciding whether it wanted to help me or destroy me. A part of me wanted to toss it in the trash. Surprise, I could still turn back. I could still choose the easier road. The one where I let the system swallow her and convinced myself I'd done all I could. But another part, the father part, the pastor part, Prize, the man who'd been silent for too many years, wouldn't let go. The address Daniel gave me was across town, tucked behind an aging strip mall whose neon signs flickered like dying stars. Prize. It was the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. And maybe that was the point. As I pulled into the lot the next morning, the fog hung low, Prize swallowing the chain-link fence and the rows of rusted doors. The place smelled faintly of oil and mildew. I got out, the key cold in my hand, and walked toward Unit 47. When the lock clicked open, surprised, the door groaned upward on stiff hinges, revealing a narrow, dusty space stacked with bankers' boxes. Prize. And on top of the nearest stack was a single manila folder with my daughter's name written in thick black marker. The air inside the unit was thick, stale, like time itself had been trapped there. Prize. I slid the manila folder off the top of the stack and sat cross-legged on the concrete floor. Inside were photocopies of emails, bank transfers, board meeting minutes, all stamped confidential in fading ink. Surprised, most of it was dry, legal language. But the names made my stomach clench. There was my daughter's, not just once, but repeated across multiple documents, Prize. Always paired with words like misappropriation and unauthorized disbursement. They'd threaded her name into the paper trail so seamlessly it looked as if she'd orchestrated the theft herself. Prize. But deeper in the folder, the story began to shift. There were memos with other names? Names of men I'd prayed with, shaken hands with, stood beside in church photos. Prize. Next to each name were transaction logs, tens of thousands siphoned from the relief fund, funneled into shell accounts, then into properties, cars, even vacations. And there, almost buried, Prize. A ledger with initials matching the board chairs. The one who'd called Emily liability. In that meeting I wasn't supposed to hear about. I didn't hear the footsteps at first. Surprise. It was the faint metallic rattle of keys that pulled me back into the present. Someone else was here. I stuffed the folder back into the box and pushed the stack toward the rear wall. Surprise. Just as a shadow spilled across the unit's doorway. Pastor, the voice was low, familiar, and wrong. It was Thomas Avery, the board chair himself. Thomas Avery filled the doorway like a dam. Surprise, blocking out the pale morning light. He wasn't dressed for Sunday service. No suit, no tie. Just a dark windbreaker zipped to his throat and work boots that left faint tracks on the dusty floor. Surprise. What are you doing here? He asked, voice steady but edged with something sharp. I forced a smile. Daniel said you kept old church records here. Surprise, I thought. Maybe there was something that could help Emily. His eyes narrowed. Daniel talks too much. He stepped inside, the metal door rolling shut behind him with a final echoing thud. Surprise, the unit shrank around us, the air heavier. You know, Pastor, he said, taking slow steps toward me. Sometimes the past is better left buried. Digging it up, he let the sentence hang. Surprise if the ending were too unpleasant to speak aloud. I took half a step back, not out of fear, but to angle myself between him and the stack of boxes. Surprise. My hand brushed against the manila folder, still warm from my grip. I'm not here to make enemies, I said. I'm here for the truth. He smiled, but it was the kind of smile that had no warmth in it. Surprise. Truth is a dangerous currency. The more you spend it, the more people want you broke. His gaze flicked to the box, and for a heartbeat, I knew he was about to lunge, so I moved first. Surprise. I slid the folder into the inner pocket of my coat, then kicked the stack of boxes toward him. They toppled in a loud, dusty collapse, spilling papers across the floor like a broken deck of cards. Surprise. While he bent instinctively to grab them, I slipped past, yanking the door open and stepping into the blinding light. The sunlight outside hit me like a revelation, harsh and filtered, surprise and impossible to ignore. I didn't run, I walked, forcing my legs to hold a steady pace, the brass key still clenched in one hand, the folder pressed to my chest under the coat. Behind me, surprise, I could hear the metallic slam of the unit door and Thomas's muffled voice, cursing under his breath. But he didn't follow. Not yet. I reached my car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. Surprise. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of having looked straight into the eyes of the man trying to destroy my daughter. And from knowing that now, he knew I was looking back. Surprise. As I drove away, the rows of rusted doors faded into the fog, but the weight of what I carried didn't lighten. Justice, I thought, isn't found in grand speeches or courtrooms alone. Sometimes, surprise, it's a father with nothing left to lose, clutching a stolen folder and daring the powerful to come after him. I glanced at the passenger seat where the manila folder lay like a live coal. I wasn't done. Surprise, not even close. That night, as Emily slept in her room, I sat in my study, flipping through the pages by lamplight. Every name, every number, every date was another stitch in a net I planned to throw over them. Surprise. For the first time since this began, I felt not just the weight of the fight, but the clarity of it. And somewhere deep inside, a calm voice whispered, now you know where the lion sleeps. Surprise. The question is, will you step into its den again? I didn't sleep that night. The folder stayed open on the desk like a loaded weapon, its pages whispering names and dates into the silence. By dawn, the decision was already made. If Thomas Avery wanted me buried under silence, I would drag the entire truth into the light so blinding that even his shadow couldn't hide. Surprise. But the light had to be aimed. Sharp, precise, and at the right moment. At 6:04, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was low, urgent. Surprise. I know what you found, the man said, and I know where the rest is. But if you want it, you'll have to meet me where it all started. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. Surprise. My pulse drumming in my ears. Where it all started, I knew exactly what he meant. And it wasn't a place for the faint of heart. Some fights are won in the open, where everyone can see the blows. Surprise. Others are fought in the dark, where every step forward feels like walking deeper into a predator's lair. Surprise. I wasn't walking into this because I wanted revenge. I was walking in because a father's love is the one currency the corrupt can never buy. This time I wouldn't just survive the lion's den. Surprise, I planned to burn it down. Life has a way of testing the limits of love. Not in the sunshine, but in the storm. Sometimes the people we've given the most to will misunderstand us, reject us, prize, or even blame us for the cracks in their own world. And in those moments, the easy choice is to walk away. But a devoted father doesn't choose easy. Through this journey, surprise, I've learned that love is not about being thanked or even about being understood. It's about showing up again and again, even when the door is slammed in your face. It's about protecting those you love, prize not for the applause, but because it's the only thing your heart will allow. If you are a father, a mother, a grandparent, or simply someone who loves, I hope my story reminds you, prize, you can't control how others see you, but you can control the truth you live by. And truth in time speaks louder than any lie. To everyone who's still fighting for their family, prize. Even in the shadows, I see you. Your courage matters. Your presence matters. You matter. Thank you for walking with me through this story. If it touched your heart, please share it, prize, so it might light someone else's path. And if you want to hear more stories of sacrifice, redemption, and the quiet strength of a father's love, stay with us here on Dad's Last Revenge, prize. Because sometimes the last word belongs to the one who refused to give up.